Julian thought the deafening jazz and expensive champagne would mask his dirty little secret, but he forgot he married a forensic actuary, watching his hand slide down his secretary's waist while he whispered about a Cayman account and filing for divorce after the holidays. I did not shed a single tear. I simply unlocked my phone and began transferring $2.5 million of my inheritance out of his reach before he could steal a cent. My name is Elena Vance, and I am 34 years old. To the rest of the Chicago elite gathered in the Gold Coast room of the Drake Hotel, I was merely the quiet, decorative wife of a rising industry titan. But to me, the world is a series of ledgers, a constant calculation of risk versus reward. I am a senior forensic actuary specializing in financial fraud. I do not see romance or charisma. I see probabilities and discrepancies. And tonight, the discrepancy standing in a tuxedo under the crystal chandelier was my husband. Julian Thorne, the CEO of Thorne Logistics, was playing the role of the perfect man to perfection. He laughed at the bad jokes of potential investors and charmed the wives of board members, his teeth gleaming as brightly as the diamond cufflinks I had bought him for our 5th anniversary. The room smelled of expensive perfume and desperation, a suffocating mix of old money trying to stay relevant and new money trying to fit in. Then, the anomaly arrived. "Elena, darling," Julian said, his voice dripping with a sweetness that did not reach his eyes. "I want you to meet our new marketing director. She is a real find." Sienna was 24 years old. She wore a red silk dress that clung to her frame like a second skin, a garment that cost more than 3 months of a junior executive's salary. Julian introduced her as a young talent, but the way his hand hovered just millimeters from her lower back told a different story. "It is such an honor to meet you, Mrs. Thorne," Sienna said. Her voice was breathy, feigned innocence masking a predator's gaze. "The pleasure is mine," I replied, my smile tight. I watched them interact, the lingering eye contact, the subtle tilt of their bodies toward each other. The probability of infidelity was 99%, but I needed more than probability. I needed proof. Half an hour later, I stepped away from the suffocating noise of the jazz band, seeking refuge behind a heavy velvet privacy screen near the terrace doors. I intended to fix my heel strap, but I froze when I heard the click of a lighter and the familiar, sharp tone of my husband's voice. "I do not care what the compliance officer says," Julian hissed into his phone. "Just make sure the paperwork is ready for Monday. I want her assets frozen before she realizes the accounts are drained. Yes, the inheritance too. Move it all." My blood ran cold. This was not a conversation about business logistics. This was a conversation about my money. He hung up, and I heard the click of heels approaching him. "Is it done?" Sienna's voice whispered. "Almost," Julian replied, his tone shifting to a smug purr. "Once I move the funds to the Cayman entity, we are set for Aspen. Do not worry about Elena. That boring bitch will be too busy crying over the divorce papers to notice she is walking away with nothing. I will leave her with the debt and take the cash." "You are so bad," Sienna giggled, the sound echoing like breaking glass in my ears. A normal woman might have collapsed. A normal woman might have stormed out and created a scene that would grace the society pages for months. But I am not a normal woman. I am a machine built to detect fraud. The initial shock evaporated within 3 seconds, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Julian was not just cheating on me with a woman 10 years my junior. He was planning to embezzle my personal fortune money from my grandmother and my own hard-earned savings, to likely cover the massive holes in his company's ledger. He viewed me as a liability to be liquidated. He had made a fatal error in his calculation. He assumed I was the passive victim. He forgot that I hunt financial criminals for a living. I composed myself, smoothing the invisible wrinkles on my dress. I walked back into the ballroom, my face a mask of pleasant indifference. I found them by the bar, still glowing from their shared secret. "Julian," I said, approaching them with a steady gait. I think the champagne has gone to my head. I am feeling a bit dizzy. I am going to call a car. Julian's eyes lit up with relief, though he quickly plastered a look of concern on his face. Oh, no. Do you want me to come with you? No, absolutely not, I insisted, touching his arm lightly. You stay. It is an important night for the company. Enjoy yourself with Sienna. You have earned it. If you are sure, he said, already turning his body away from me. I am very sure, I said. I turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving the warmth and the music behind. I navigated the lobby and stepped out into the biting wind of a Chicago winter night. I did not shed a tear. Instead, my mind was already racing, visualizing spreadsheets and access codes. Julian thought he had 2 weeks until the divorce. He did not know that his timeline had just been accelerated. I sat in the back of the taxi, watching the city lights blur, and began to formulate the algorithm for his destruction. The party was over for me, but the audit was just beginning. The silence in our penthouse was absolute, a sharp contrast to the chaotic noise of the party I had just left. I did not bother to turn on the main lights. The glow of the city skyline and the harsh blue light of my triple monitor setup were illumination enough. I sat down at the mahogany desk, kicked off my heels, and cracked my knuckles. It was time to work. Julian always assumed that because I was a woman, I was technologically illiterate regarding his complex systems. He believed his passwords were impenetrable. He was wrong. I typed in the administrator override code, a sequence I had memorized 3 years ago when I set up the home network security myself, and the screen flashed green. I was in. Let us see what you have been hiding, Julian, I whispered to the empty room. I navigated immediately to our joint bank accounts and investment portfolios. My eyes scanned the transaction history, not reading the numbers as money, but as data points in a pattern of deceit. It took me less than 10 minutes to find the anomaly. For the past 6 months, there had been a steady drip of transfers amounts small enough to avoid triggering automatic federal reporting flags moving from our savings into an entity called Vanguard Holdings. To the untrained eye, it looked like a legitimate diversified bond purchase. To me, it looked like a shell company. You amateur, I muttered, my fingers flying across the keyboard. You are structured like a Ponzi scheme. I dug deeper. The horror truly set in when I accessed the mortgage portal. There was a pending application for a second mortgage on this very penthouse, a loan against 90% of the property's equity. My eyes narrowed as I pulled up the document. At the bottom, right next to Julian's flamboyant signature, was mine. It was a digital forgery, a clumsy copy-paste job from a tax return I had signed 2 years ago. The status bar blinked pending approval. Estimated funding date next Monday. He is going to leverage the roof over my head, I said, my voice trembling slightly with rage. He is going to take it all. The trembling stopped instantly. Rage was inefficient. Action was required. I opened a new secure window and logged into the offshore blind trust I had established before we were married, a failsafe my grandmother had insisted upon. With a few keystrokes, I initiated the transfer of my entire inheritance. $2.5 million began its digital journey away from Julian's grasping hands. Next came the stock portfolio. I did not have time to be sentimental about market positions. I executed market sell orders for every single share in my personal name. Apple, Tesla, Berkshire Hathaway, it all went. As the cash settled in the brokerage account, I immediately wired it to a new high-yield savings account I had opened 5 minutes prior at a credit union where Julian had zero influence. While the progress bars for the transfers crawled across the screen, I turned my attention to Thorn Logistics. I accessed the remote server backup Julian kept in the safe room. I downloaded everything 5 years of tax returns, the company's internal bank statements, and his archived emails. That was when I found it. A hidden folder nested deep within the system architecture, labeled simply Project S. I opened it, expecting trade secrets. Instead, I found receipts. Unbelievable, I breathed out. He is charging everything to the company. There were invoices for a Cartier love bracelet, a lease agreement for a luxury apartment in the Gold Coast district, and receipts for 5-star dinners. All of them were dated within the last 6 months. All of them were paid for by the Thorne Logistics corporate expense account. And all of them were for Sienna. This was not just adultery. This was embezzlement. It was a felony. By the time the final transfer confirmation popped up on my screen, the clock on the wall read 4 in the morning. I checked the joint account one last time. It held exactly $500, the minimum balance required to keep the account open. The rest was gone, safely tucked away in accounts that Julian could not touch without a court order that would take him years to get. I shut down the computer and wiped the local browsing history, leaving no trace of my late-night activity. My body felt heavy, but my mind was light, unburdened by the anxiety that had plagued me for weeks. I walked to the kitchen, swallowed a single sleeping pill with a glass of water, and went to the guest bedroom. "Checkmate, Julian," I whispered into the darkness as I pulled the duvet up to my chin. "I hope you enjoy your victory lap." I closed my eyes and fell into the deepest, most peaceful sleep I had experienced in months. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in domestic theater. To the outside world, and especially to Julian, I was the devoted wife bustling about, wrapping gifts in gold foil and hanging evergreen garlands on the staircase of our penthouse. Inside, however, I was a spy in my own home. Julian grew colder with each passing day. He came home late, smelling of a perfume that was too floral to be mine, and offered vague excuses that I accepted with a practiced, oblivious smile. The tension in the house was palpable, like a rubber band stretched to its breaking point. One evening, while I was polishing the silverware, Julian slid a stack of documents across the marble kitchen island. "I need you to sign these. Elena," he said, not even looking up from his phone. "It is just some updated liability waivers for the company insurance. Standard procedure for spouses." I picked up the papers. My eyes scanned the legal jargon. They were not insurance waivers. They were quitclaim deeds and post-nuptial amendments that would effectively strip me of my marital assets in the event of a separation. He truly thought I was an idiot. "Oh, Julian," I said, frowning slightly. "You know how anxious I get about legal language. I cannot sign this without Mr. Henderson looking at it. My grandmother always said, 'Never sign what you do not read.' Just sign the damn papers. Elena," he snapped, slamming his hand on the counter. "Why must you always make things so difficult?" "I am sorry," I whispered, lowering my eyes to hide the gleam of triumph. "I will call him tomorrow. I promise." Of course, I never called Mr. Henderson. Instead, I met with Marcus. Marcus and I had gone to university together. He was a shark in a 3-piece suit, a divorce attorney known for dissecting unfaithful husbands with the precision of a surgeon. We met in a dimly lit booth at a steakhouse on the outskirts of the city, far from where Julian's social circle would ever venture. "He is sloppy," Marcus said, flipping through the dossier I had compiled. "But arrogance makes men sloppy. Here is the strategy. Elena, do not confront him. Let him strike first. When he thinks he has won, he will leave his flank exposed. We wait for the drop." "I can wait," I replied, sipping my sparkling water. I am very good at waiting. Back home, I began the physical extraction. Over the course of 3 days, I systematically raided our safe. I took the Patek Philippe watch I had bought him for his 30th birthday, my grandmother's vintage emerald necklace, and the stash of gold bullion we kept for emergencies. I replaced them with high-end replicas I had sourced from a dealer Marcus recommended. The weight and feel were identical. Only an appraiser would know the difference. Julian, who only cared about the flash and not the substance, would never notice until it was too late. The real assets went into a safe deposit box under my maiden name. Then came the announcement I had been expecting. I have to go to Aspen for New Year's Eve. Julian told me 3 days before the holiday, avoiding my gaze as he packed his Louis Vuitton duffel bag. Emergency client meetings. It is a disaster. I hate to leave you alone. Oh, Julian, I said, putting a hand to my chest. That is terrible. I will miss you so much. Inside, I was popping champagne corks. As soon as he left for the office that morning, I took the spare key to the Range Rover, the one legally registered in my name, though he drove it exclusively, and installed a GPS tracker under the rear bumper. It was fully within my rights. I was merely tracking my own property. Within hours, the dot on my phone screen confirmed he was not at the office, but parked outside a luxury apartment complex downtown. Sienna's apartment. When Julian returned from his business trip 2 days after the new year, he was a different man. The tension was gone, replaced by a manic, gloating energy. He hummed as he unpacked his bag. He poured himself a drink and looked at me with a smirk that sent shivers down my spine. He believed the mortgage funds had been approved and were sitting in the joint account, ready for him to plunder. He believed he had successfully tricked me into signing away my rights. He believed he was the smartest man in the room. "Did you have a good trip?" I asked, watching him over the rim of my coffee mug. "The best," Julian replied, raising his glass to me. "Truly productive. This year is going to be monumental. Elena, things are finally falling into place." I smiled back, a genuine smile this time. "Yes, Julian. I have a feeling it will be a winter we will never forget." He had no idea that while he was skiing in Aspen, the ground beneath his feet had already been liquidated. It was exactly 2 weeks since the Christmas party, a Friday evening that should have been reserved for unwinding with a glass of wine. Instead, the air in the dining room was thick enough to choke on. Julian did not sit down. He stood at the head of the table, his silhouette imposing against the city lights behind him, and dropped a thick manila envelope onto the polished wood surface. It landed with a heavy, final thud that echoed louder than any shout. "Elena, we are not compatible anymore," Julian announced, his voice devoid of any warmth. He adjusted his cufflinks, refusing to look me in the eye. "I have grown. You have remained stagnant. I need a woman with ambition, someone who understands my status and my vision. Sienna is that woman." I looked at the envelope. I did not need to open it to know it contained a petition for dissolution of marriage. "You are leaving me for your marketing director," I stated flatly. "I am upgrading my life," he corrected, his arrogance swelling. "And as part of that upgrade, I need this apartment, since the penthouse is technically a corporate asset of Thorne Logistics. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises." It was a lie so bold it was almost impressive. My name was on the deed right next to his, and I had paid the property taxes from my personal account for the last 3 years, but I did not correct him. "Not yet." He pushed a second, thinner document toward me. "This is a separation agreement. It is generous, considering the circumstances. If you sign it tonight and agree not to contest the divorce, I will provide you with a small monthly allowance for 1 year. It is enough to rent a studio apartment somewhere. Modest. If you fight me, Elena, I will bury you in legal fees until you are destitute." He really believed he had won. He thought he had already drained our accounts and secured the mortgage funds. In his mind, I was already bankrupt. I just did not know it yet. I picked up the pen he offered, twirling it between my fingers. I looked up at him, my face a mask of absolute calm. "Are you sure you want to do this, Julian?" I asked softly. "Are you absolutely sure? No regrets?" Julian let out a short, derisive laugh. "Regrets? My only regret is that I did not do this sooner. Look at you, Elena. You are a bean counter, a boring, risk-averse paper pusher. You will never understand the world of men like me. We are creators. We take risks. You just calculate the damage. Before I could respond, the front door beeped. I had not buzzed anyone in. Sienna walked into the hallway, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble floor. She was not wearing a coat, despite the freezing January wind outside. She looked at me with a smirk that was equal parts pity and malice, then walked straight to Julian and looped her arm through his. "Is she gone yet, baby?" Sienna asked, her voice grating. She looked around the living room, her eyes scanning the furniture like a vulture circling a carcass. God, this decor is so dated. That beige sofa has to go immediately. I want everything in white leather and chrome. Soon, Julian promised her, kissing her temple. She is just signing the papers. I stood up slowly. I uncapped the pen and signed the bottom of the first page the acknowledgement of service, proving I had received the divorce petition. I left the asset separation agreement completely blank. "There," I said, placing the pen down. "I have acknowledged your request." "Good girl," Julian sneered. "Now pack a bag." "Way ahead of you," I replied. I walked to the hallway closet and pulled out the single suitcase I had packed that morning. I did not look back at the apartment I had designed, or the husband I had once loved. I looked at the two of them standing there, gloating in their ignorance. "Enjoy the apartment?" I said, my hand on the doorknob. "It is. Very cold this time of year." I walked out the door and let it click shut behind me. I left them with their victory, their champagne, and their plans for redecorating. They had no idea that they were standing on the deck of a sinking ship, and I had just taken the only lifeboat. I settled into the crushed velvet armchair of my new serviced apartment at the Langham, a glass of vintage Pinot Noir in my hand. I had paid the deposit with the interest alone from the funds I had secured. On the coffee table, my iPad glowed with the interface of our joint banking app. It was Monday morning, and the show was about to begin. I watched the screen like a hawk. At 10 in the morning, a notification popped up. It was a transaction attempt at a high-end Italian furniture showroom in the Design District. The amount was $12,500. Transaction declined, insufficient funds. I took a slow sip of wine, visualizing the scene perfectly. Julian would be standing at the counter, his platinum card held out with that arrogant tilt of his wrist, while Sienna pointed out a white leather sectional she simply had to have. A minute later, another notification. Transaction declined. He was trying the card again. I could practically hear his voice rising, blaming the incompetent cashier or the faulty machine. Then, the inevitable call to the bank customer service line initiated. I had the account alerts set to push directly to my device, so I saw exactly when the customer service representative accessed the file. Julian was currently being told that his accounts were frozen due to suspicious activity and a balance that hovered near zero. He must have logged into the mobile app right then. I imagined the color draining from his face as he stared at the screen. The joint investment account, which had held a healthy 6 figures just weeks ago, now displayed a perfect round zero. The transaction history was brutally clear. Withdrawal by co-owner Elena Vance. My phone began to ring. The caller ID flashed Julian. I let it ring. 1, 2, 3, 4. On the 5th ring, I slid my thumb across the screen and answered, keeping my voice light and breezy. "Hello? You bitch!" Julian screamed so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "What did you do? Where is the money? I am at the furniture store and my card is declined. You stole everything." "Is there a problem with the card?" "Julian," I asked, examining my manicure. "That is strange. It worked fine for me when I paid the movers." "Do not play games with me," he roared, his voice cracking with panic. "I am looking at the transfer history. You emptied the accounts. I am calling the police. I am going to have you arrested for grand larceny." "Go ahead," I replied, my tone hardening into ice. "Call them. Tell them your wife moved money from a joint account that bears her name. Tell them she withdrew her own inheritance. While you are at it, explain to them why you were trying to spend $12,000 on furniture with your mistress while still married. I am sure the judge will find that fascinating. You cannot do this, he sputtered, the wind taken out of his sails. I have bills to pay. The company. Good luck with the electric bill, Julian, I said. I hope Sienna has some savings. I hung up just as a new email notification arrived. This one was from the mortgage lender. It was a formal notice that the application for the second mortgage on the penthouse had been summarily canceled. The reason cited was a fraud alert filed by one of the homeowners regarding a forged digital signature. I smiled. Julian was standing in a furniture store with no credit, no cash, and the realization that the loan he was banking on to save his drowning company had just evaporated. According to the GPS tracker on the Range Rover, the car stayed parked in front of the showroom for another 20 minutes. When it finally moved, it did not go to a restaurant for a celebratory lunch. It went straight back to Sienna's apartment. I later learned from the doorman logs, which I could still access, that they arrived in a yellow taxi. Julian's cards were useless. Sienna had to pay for the ride. I imagined her digging into her purse, counting out $20 in cash. Her face twisted in annoyance. It was the first crack in their perfect little romance. She had signed up for a sugar daddy, but she was waking up with a deadbeat. The legal assault began on a Tuesday morning with a courier delivering a thick envelope to Marcus's office. Julian's attorney, a man known for his aggression but lacking in nuance, had drafted a demand letter accusing me of unauthorized appropriation of marital assets. They demanded the immediate return of $2.5 million, claiming that my actions had caused irreparable harm to Julian's liquidity and business operations. I sat in Marcus's conference room, reading the letter with the detachment of someone grading a poorly written exam paper. They are bluffing, Marcus said, tossing the letter onto the mahogany table. They call it theft. I call it fiduciary self-defense. They are hoping you will panic and wire the money back to avoid a court battle. I do not panic, Marcus, I replied, smoothing my skirt. I calculate. Marcus grinned, revealing the predatory instinct that made him so expensive and so effective. We did not send the money back. Instead, Marcus sent a reply attached to a binder 3 inches thick. It contained the original trust documents from my grandmother, bank statements dating back 5 years, and a clear paper trail proving that every single cent I had moved was either inheritance or income earned prior to the marriage. We argued that I had removed the funds solely to protect them from Julian's gross financial negligence. Then, we dropped the bomb. We filed a countersuit demanding a full forensic audit of Thorne Logistics as part of the divorce discovery process to determine the true value of the marital estate. This was the one thing Julian could not survive. I knew his company was drowning in debt. I knew he had been using corporate funds to finance his lifestyle, treating the business account like a personal piggy bank. An audit would not just hurt him financially. It would expose him to criminal liability. Panic set in for him almost immediately. Through my network of informants, mostly the wives of his business partners whom I had accidentally bumped into at the club, I learned that Julian was frantically trying to secure emergency bridge loans, but the rumors were already swirling. I heard the banks froze everything, I had whispered to Mrs. Galloway over tea, looking suitably distressed. I am just worried about his stability. By Wednesday, the whispers had turned into closed doors. Julian called his usual lenders, but nobody was buying. The scent of bankruptcy was on him, and in Chicago. That scent is harder to wash off than skunk spray. Meanwhile, back at the penthouse, the domestic paradise was crumbling. Sienna, who had likely expected a life of limitless shopping sprees, was beginning to realize the reality of her situation. I checked the logs from the home security system, which I still had access to, and saw that she had spent hours in the home office. She was not working. She was snooping. She had likely found the mortgage overdue notices I had left in the drawer. She now knew that the penthouse was not a kingdom. but a heavily leveraged liability. On Thursday, Julian snapped. He showed up at my firm, storming past the reception desk with his face flushed a violent red. "Elena," he screamed, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "Come out here! You! You cannot hide behind your lawyers forever!" My colleagues looked up from their desks. Stunned, I did not move. I simply pressed the intercom button for security. 2 large guards appeared within 30 seconds, intercepting him before he could reach the elevators. "Sir, you need to leave," the head guard said firmly. "She is my wife," Julian spat, veins bulging in his neck. "I have a right to talk to her." "Actually, you do not," the guard replied, holding up the temporary restraining order Marcus had filed that morning, citing Julian's erratic behavior and verbal threats. "If you do not leave, we are calling the police." Julian looked at the guards, then at the silent, judging faces of my co-workers. He fixed his eyes on the security camera, knowing I was watching. "This is not over, Elena," he shouted before turning and storming out. It was not over, but the end was in sight. 10 minutes later, I sent an email to Julian's personal address. Attached was a spreadsheet detailing every purchase he had made for Sienna over the last 6 months, using company funds, the apartment rent, the jewelry, the flights. I typed a short message in the body of the email. "I am sure the Internal Revenue Service would be very interested to see how you categorize these expenses. Is a diamond bracelet considered a deductible client acquisition cost?" I hit send and watched the progress bar complete. The trap was not just shut, it was welded tight. The discovery phase of a lawsuit is usually a tedious mountain of paperwork, but in the case of Vance v. Thorne, it was a public execution. We did not just provide evidence, we provided an autopsy of Julian's integrity. Marcus laid the documents out on the table in the deposition room. One by one, first came the digital forensic report confirming that the signature on the mortgage application had been copy-pasted from a tax return filed 2 years prior. Then came the undeniable proof of the slush fund. But the real horror was hidden in the trading logs. Julian had not just been spending money, he had been gambling it. He had quietly drained the employee pension fund of Thorne Logistics to cover a massive margin call on a failed tech stock bet. He had lost 40% of his employees' retirement savings in 3 days. My $2.5 million was never meant for an investment. It was meant to plug the hole before the auditors arrived. Sienna was deposed the following afternoon. I watched the recording later with a glass of water in hand. The moment she realized Julian was not a millionaire, but a man facing federal prison time, her loyalty evaporated. "He told me he owned everything," Sienna said to the camera, her mascara running down her cheeks. "He said he was going to buy me a condo in the Loop. He used the company credit card for the deposit. I did not know I am a victim here, too." She sang like a canary, detailing every promise, every illegal purchase, and every conversation where Julian had bragged about cooking the books. The consequences were immediate. By Friday, the board of directors of Thorne Logistics voted unanimously to suspend Julian as CEO pending an internal investigation. He was escorted out of the building by the very security guards he used to command. Then the banks moved in. I received a notice as a co-owner that the penthouse was entering foreclosure proceedings. Julian had lied about the automatic payments. He had not paid the mortgage in 3 months. The bank was calling the loan. My phone rang on Saturday morning. It was a number I had deleted years ago. Julian's mother. This was the woman who had once told me I was too pedestrian for her brilliant son. "Elena, please," she sobbed into the receiver. "You have to help him. They are saying terrible things. He is your husband." "He is a criminal, Beatrice," I replied, my voice steady. "He is ruining his life." She wailed, "You have money. You can bail him out. Please, for the sake of family." "He ruined his own life when he stole from his workers and cheated on his wife," I said. "I am not a bank. Beatrice, I am the woman he tried to rob. Do not call me again." I hung up and blocked the number. The final blow to Julian's sanity came later that day. According to the police report filed later, Julian had rushed home, desperate for liquid cash to pay a retainer for a criminal defense attorney. He opened the wall safe and grabbed his collection of vintage watches, Rolex, Patek, Audemars Piguet. He took them to a high-end pawnbroker in the Diamond District, expecting to walk out with $50,000 in cash. The broker took one look under the loupe and laughed. "These are excellent replicas," the broker had told him, "but they are worth about $200 each, maybe $300 for the Patek if the buyer is nearsighted." Julian had apparently collapsed right there in the shop, screaming that he had been robbed. But he had not been robbed. He had just been outsmarted weeks ago. To top it all off, the universe delivered one last piece of poetic justice. Julian's biggest contract, the lifeline that kept Thorne Logistics afloat, was with a manufacturing giant called Reynolds Industries. Mr. Reynolds happened to be one of my first clients from a decade ago. I had saved his company from a payroll fraud scheme. When the news of the allegations broke, Mr. Reynolds called the interim CEO of Thorne Logistics and canceled the contract immediately, citing a morality clause. He sent me a short text message that evening. "Loyalty is a currency. Elena, some people are just bankrupt." Julian was now jobless, homeless, penniless, and facing indictment, and I was just getting started. The fall of Julian Thorne was not a graceful descent. It was a crash landing. Within 3 days of the bank foreclosure notice, he was evicted from our penthouse. He had to move into a furnished studio apartment in a decaying building on the far west side of the city, a place where the elevator smelled of stale urine and the sirens never stopped wailing. The leased Range Rover was repossessed from the street while he was buying groceries, leaving him to carry his bags home in the rain. The humiliation was compounded by the digital circus. Sienna did not just leave him, she incinerated him. She posted a tearful 10-minute video on social media, titled My Truth, in which she claimed she was a young, naive victim manipulated by a predatory narcissist who had lied about his marital status and financial solvency. The video went viral. Julian was not just broke, he was a pariah. I agreed to meet him one last time before the court hearing. I chose the venue, a greasy spoon diner with sticky tables and fluorescent lighting that buzzed incessantly. It was a far cry from the private clubs where we used to dine, and that was exactly the point. When Julian walked in, I almost did not recognize him. He looked 10 years older than he had at the Christmas party. His skin was gray and pasty, his eyes were rimmed with red, and his once immaculate Italian suit was wrinkled and stained at the cuff. He looked like a man who had not slept in a week. He slid into the booth opposite me, his hands trembling as he reached for the glass of water. "Elena," he croaked, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for coming. I did not think you would." "I am here to close the account, Julian," I said, keeping my hands folded on the table. "Make it quick." He tried to smile, but it looked more like a grimace. "I made a mistake, Elena. A terrible, terrible mistake. Sienna, she got into my head. She made me feel like I was king of the world, but it was all an illusion. You were the only one who was ever real. I still love you. We can fix this. We can rebuild. I have ideas for a new company." It was pathetic. He was trying to charm me with the same lines he had used to court investors, but he had no capital left to back them up. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single, crisp document. I slid it across the table. It was not a divorce paper. It was a drafted but unsent whistleblower complaint addressed to the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "Read it," I commanded. Julian picked it up. As his eyes scanned the lines detailing the tax fraud, the embezzlement of pension funds, and the falsified loan applications, the little color remaining in his face drained away. This outlines 5 counts of federal wire fraud and tax evasion. I explained calmly. If I file this, along with the hard drive of evidence I have in a secure location, you are looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison. Minimum. You would send your husband to jail, he whispered, dropping the paper as if it burned his fingers. My husband died the night he tried to steal my inheritance to buy his mistress a condo, I replied. You are just a liability I need to write off. I placed a pen on top of the document. Here is the deal, Julian. You are going to sign the divorce settlement I have prepared. It states that you accept full responsibility for all debts associated with Thorn Logistics and the penthouse. You leave the marriage with 0 assets and 0 claim to my funds. And you will issue a public statement apologizing for the financial misconduct, clearing my name of any involvement. Julian stared at the pen. I could see the war raging behind his eyes. His ego, that massive, fragile thing that had driven him his whole life, was screaming at him to fight, to flip the table and storm out. But his fear was louder. He looked at the buzzing fluorescent light, then at the dirty floor, visualizing a prison cell. And if I do? He asked, his voice barely audible. If you sign, I shred this complaint. I said, I will not report you to the federal authorities. You will be broke, disgraced, and in debt. But you will be free. You can try to start over. It will be hard, but it is better than a cage. He looked at me, searching for a trace of the submissive wife he thought he knew, but he found only the forensic auditor. You are cruel, he spat out, tears welling in his eyes. I am fair. I corrected him. You tried to destroy me for profit. I am simply balancing the ledger. Tick-tock, Julian. The offer expires when I finish this coffee. He picked up the pen. His hand shook violently as he hovered over the paper, caught between the death of his pride and the survival of his body. The mediation room at the Cook County Courthouse was sterile and smelled faintly of floor wax and stale coffee. It was a fitting setting for the final act of my marriage. Julian sat across the long oak table, looking like a man who had been hunted for sport. His high-priced shark of a lawyer had resigned earlier that week due to non-payment of fees, leaving him with a court-appointed public defender who looked overworked and thoroughly unimpressed by his client. Julian, however, had one last desperate card to play. He leaned forward, his eyes darting between the judge and me, sweat beading on his forehead. She is lying about the fraud, Julian shouted, slamming his fist on the table. She moved the money because she was having an affair. She is the one who broke the marriage contract. I have sources who saw her with a man at the hotel. It was a pathetic attempt at projection. He was trying to smear my reputation to create leverage for a settlement. My lawyer, Marcus, did not even blink. He calmly slid a thick folder toward the judge. Your Honor, this binder contains Mrs. Thorne's GPS logs, credit card statements, and sworn affidavits from her colleagues for the dates in question. She was either at her office or at home. Mr. Thorne, on the other hand, was documented spending those specific dates in Aspen with his mistress. The judge, a stern woman with gray hair and 0 patience for theatrics, flipped through the pages. She looked up at Julian over her spectacles, her expression one of pure disdain. Mr. Thorne, the judge said, her voice sharp, the evidence of financial malfeasance in this family trust is overwhelming. You have forged signatures, embezzled corporate funds, and now you are wasting the court's time with baseless accusations. I suggest you listen to the settlement offer before I lose my patience entirely. But I cannot sign this, Julian pleaded, his voice cracking. It leaves me with nothing. The debt, it is too much. I will be ruined. You are already ruined, Julian, I said, speaking for the first time. But it gets worse. I pulled out a single photograph from my bag and placed it face up on the table. It was a grainy surveillance shot of a black SUV parked outside Julian's new studio apartment. 2 large men were leaning against the hood. I did some digging into how you maintained your lifestyle after the company credit cards were cut off, I said softly. You borrowed $50,000 from the Russo brothers in Cicero. High interest, cash only. And I believe the payment was due yesterday. Julian's face went white. He stopped breathing for a moment. He looked at the photo, then at the door, realizing the walls were closing in, not just legally, but physically. He knew exactly who those men were, and he knew they did not litigate. They broke kneecaps. You know them, he whispered, terror choking him. I know of them, I replied, and I know they are currently parked in the loading zone outside the front entrance of this courthouse. They seem very eager to speak with you. Julian looked around the room, realizing he was completely alone. His public defender was packing up his briefcase. The judge was glaring at him, and I was holding the pen that could save his life, or at least keep him out of prison so he could try to pay off his dangerous creditors. I was the only person offering him a way out of the immediate fire, even if it meant jumping into the frying pan of poverty. If you sign the agreement, I said, sliding the document toward him, you accept full responsibility for the corporate debt and the mortgage. You walk away with zero claim to my assets. In exchange, I drop the fraud charges, and you can leave through the judge's private rear exit. It is the only way you avoid the men out front. I have no choice, Julian stammered, his hand shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen. No, you do not, I confirmed. He signed. The scratch of the pen against the paper was the sound of his total defeat. He signed away the penthouse, the cars, the accounts, and his pride. He took on millions of dollars in debt to save himself from jail and a beating. Done, the judge declared, banging her gavel. Counsel, file the papers. As soon as the session ended, Julian did not look at me. He scrambled toward the bailiff, begging to be let out the back way. He looked like a rat scurrying into the shadows. I watched him go, feeling nothing but a profound sense of closure. I walked out the front doors of the courthouse and stepped into the biting Chicago winter. The wind was fierce, whipping my hair around my face, but for the first time in years, I did not feel the cold. I felt warm. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the icy air. I was single. I was free. And thanks to my own quick thinking, I was still very, very rich. The nightmare was over, and I had woken up the winner. 3 months had passed since the gavel fell in that cold courtroom. I was standing in the center of the penthouse living room, but it looked nothing like the place Julian and I had shared. I had purchased the property back from the bank at a foreclosure auction for 60 cents on the dollar. It was a steal. The first thing I did was hire a demolition crew to tear out the gaudy fixtures Sienna had picked out during her brief, delusional reign as the lady of the house. The white leather and chrome were gone, replaced by warm oak and understated velvet. The space finally felt like mine. Ms. Vance, do you want the old master bedroom curtains kept? My interior designer asked, holding up the heavy drapes that used to block out the sun. No, I replied, sipping my morning coffee. Burn them. I want everything fresh. I want to see the light. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Down below, somewhere in the gritty industrial district, Julian was starting his shift. My sources told me he was working as a warehouse shift manager for a third-rate shipping company. It was a poetic demotion. He was living in a basement apartment, dodging process servers and paying off his tax debts in agonizingly small installments. He had tried to text me once, a long, rambling message begging for a loan for old time's sake. I blocked the number without finishing the first sentence. Sienna fared no better. The internet is a cruel place, and once the story of her involvement in the scandal broke, her reputation as an influencer disintegrated. She was branded a gold digger, lost her brand deals, and reportedly moved back to her hometown in Ohio to work in her father's hardware store. They had tried to play a high-stakes game against a grandmaster, and they had both folded. I turned back to my desk, where a new contract awaited my signature. I had taken a portion of the $2.5 million I had protected and directed it into a venture capital fund focused on female-led startups. I was no longer just a forensic actuary. I was an angel investor. I was building a legacy that Julian could never touch. Earlier that afternoon, I had found a small velvet box tucked away in a junk drawer I had missed during the initial purge. It contained my wedding ring, a 3-carat diamond that once symbolized a promise. Now just compressed carbon and bad memories. A younger version of me might have thrown it into Lake Michigan, but the woman I am now knows the value of assets. I called the director of the city women's shelter immediately. "I am sending over a donation," I told her over the phone. "It is the proceeds from an auction. It should be enough to fund your new wing." "Oh my God, Elena," she had cried. "This will save so many lives. Thank you." "Do not thank me," I said, a small smile playing on my lips. "Thank my ex-husband. He finally bought something useful." Night had fallen over Chicago. The city was a grid of glittering gold and amber lights, stretching out to the dark expanse of the lake. I poured myself a glass of Cabernet, a bottle I bought with my own money, drank in my own home, on my own terms. I realized then that the sweetest revenge was not seeing Julian suffer, though that was satisfying. The true victory was realizing that I did not need him to define my worth. He was a bad investment I had held onto for too long. I raised my glass to the reflection in the window. The woman staring back was stronger, richer, and wiser. "Here is to you, Elena," I whispered to the glass. "You calculated the risk, and you beat the house. I am Elena Vance, and I never lose. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. I would love to connect and hear your thoughts on Julian's karma. Do not forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people.